The cold wind howled through the black stone towers of the Alpha King's fortress, carrying with it the scent of frost and iron. The great hall was silent, filled only with whispers and the soft scrape of armor against the stone floor. The Alpha King, once invincible and feared by all, lay motionless in the center of the hall. His body was draped with ceremonial furs, his chest still, his face pale beneath the silvered light of the moon that streamed through the high windows. The pack had gathered around him, a sea of eyes filled with fear, sorrow, and confusion. Wolves and warriors alike bowed their heads, unsure what to do when their strongest leader fell. Some muttered prayers, others blamed themselves, and a few, the ambitious few, smiled with secret hope that now, with the Alpha gone, a new ruler might rise. Among them, one figure moved differently. She did not bow. She did not hide in fear. She was Leora, a rejected Omega. She had been cast aside by the pack long ago, deemed too weak, too fragile, too insignificant to matter. Yet now, as she approached the fallen Alpha, there was a fire in her chest that would not be quenched. Her hand shook as she reached the edge of the circle of mourners. She knelt beside the Alpha King's body, letting her fingers brush against the cold skin of his hand. She had seen him many times before, strong, commanding, and unyielding. But in those rare moments when he had looked at her, she had glimpsed something softer, something human. She remembered the way he had spared her during hunts, the small nod of acknowledgement when she had done her best to protect the pack, the quiet reassurance in his gaze. Her voice, soft but trembling, broke the silence of the hall. "Don't bury him," she said. It was almost a whisper, yet the words carried through the hall like a storm. The pack froze. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some laughed, thinking it a joke. Others frowned, feeling the weight of something unknown stirring in the air. The Alpha King's closest advisors moved forward, shaking their heads. "Leora," one said, his voice stern, "step back. You have no power here. Let the rites begin. We must honor him as dead." But Leora shook her head, determination flashing in her eyes. "He is not dead," she said firmly. "I feel it. He still breathes, somewhere inside him. We cannot give up on him." The hall grew tense. Whispers of old legends floated among the pack, tales of Omegas with secret gifts able to awaken what was thought lost. The stories were always dismissed as myth, stories told to children by the fire. Yet now, in the cold hall with the Alpha King lying before them, those stories seemed possible. Leora knelt closer to the Alpha, placing her hands upon his chest. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of the fortress, the faint echoes of the world outside, and the heartbeat of the pack itself. She whispered an old prayer, words that had been passed down in her bloodline, long hidden, long forgotten, words of calling, of hope, of life. The cold seemed to press in around her, seeping into her bones, yet she held her focus. The pack watched in silence, some in fear, some in awe. Leora's voice grew steadier, more certain as she repeated the incantation. A faint warmth pulsed beneath her palm. It was almost imperceptible, a subtle tremor that could have been imagined, but Leora felt it. Her eyes widened and her breath caught. Slowly, almost hesitantly, the Alpha King's chest moved, just a fraction. A single shallow breath escaped his lips. Gasps filled the hall. The pack stepped back, some stumbling as their disbelief overcame them. The Alpha King's eyes remained closed, but the faint rise and fall of his chest told a story the pack had never expected. He was alive, but fragile, vulnerable, and in need of care. Leora felt a mix of relief and fear. She had never imagined she would hold such power. Never imagined she would be the one to touch the invincible Alpha King in a way that could save him. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from something deeper, a connection she could not explain. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the hall. The Alpha King's second in command, a massive wolf warrior named Draven, stepped forward. His eyes burned with anger and confusion. "What madness is this?" he demanded. "She is an Omega, rejected and powerless. You would let her meddle with the king's life?" Leora lifted her head, her gaze unwavering. "I am not powerless," she said, "and this is not meddling. I feel his life. I can help him. If we act now, we can save him." Draven growled, but he did not move to stop her. There was something in her voice, a certainty that chilled him even as it inspired fear. Slowly, he stepped back, letting her continue. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Leora's hands never left the Alpha King, her voice repeating the prayer, calling forth what seemed impossible. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows as if the very world waited with bated breath. Then the Alpha King stirred. His fingers twitched. His eyes flickered beneath closed lids, and a deep, shuddering breath left his body. Leora gasped, tears welling in her eyes. She had done it. She had awakened him. The pack fell silent, staring in awe. Some could not believe their eyes. Others whispered prayers of thanks, finally seeing the truth in the old legends. Slowly, the Alpha King opened his eyes. They were still clouded with pain, confusion, and a shadow of mortality he had never faced before. For the first time in his life, he was not the all-powerful Alpha. He was a man, fragile and human, and yet alive. His gaze fell upon Leora. At first it was confusion, then recognition. He remembered the warmth of her hands, the words she had whispered, and the courage that had brought life back to him. For a moment neither spoke. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them in the silent hall. "Who are you?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse, filled with wonder and disbelief. "I am Leora," she said softly. "I am the Omega who refused to let you die." He tried to rise, but his body was weak. Leora quickly knelt beside him again, supporting him. "Rest," she said gently. "You are alive. That is enough for now." He looked into her eyes, a storm of emotions passing over his face. Gratitude, curiosity, and something unspoken. Something dangerous and thrilling. A spark that neither of them could name yet. The bond between them had been forged in the shadows of death, in the heart of fear, and it would not be easily broken. The hall remained still, the pack unsure of what to do. The Alpha King, once feared above all, now relied on the hands of a rejected Omega to hold him, to guide him back to strength. The balance of power had shifted, subtly but undeniably. Leora knew this. She could feel it in the Alpha's pulse, in the way he clutched her hand for support. And deep down she understood that this moment was only the beginning. The Alpha King had been given back life, but with it came vulnerability, responsibility, and a connection neither of them could ignore. Outside, the wind continued to howl, carrying the scent of distant forests and untamed lands. The moonlight poured through the windows, casting long shadows across the hall. The Alpha King's eyes flicked toward the darkness beyond the fortress, sensing threats he could not yet name. Leora tightened her hold on him, her heart swelling with both fear and determination. "I will not let you fall again," she whispered. "Not now. Not ever." He met her gaze, a shadow of a smile touching his lips, weak but genuine. For the first time in years, he was not alone, and perhaps, in that fragile bond, he could find not just survival, but something far greater. And yet, even as life returned to him, a whisper of unease lingered in the hall. Eyes from the far corners watched, some filled with envy, others with suspicion. Not all would welcome the Alpha's revival, and not all would trust the Omega who had brought him back. The story was far from over. The Alpha King had returned, but his journey had just begun, and the bond with Leora, once rejected, now essential, would be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The moonlight flickered over the fortress walls as the hall grew quiet once more. The Alpha King's breath came steadier now, and Leora remained at his side, unwavering. Outside, the forest waited, full of shadows and secrets, and the world beyond would soon demand that they face its dangers together. Cliffhanger. As Leora pressed her hand to his chest one last time that night, a faint shadow stirred in the corner of the hall, watching. The Alpha King, finally alert, sensed it too, his eyes narrowing. Danger was approaching, and neither he nor Leora could face it alone. The fortress had grown quieter since the Alpha King's return. The hall where he had been laid to rest now stood empty, save for Leora, who stayed by his side long after the pack had dispersed. She had spent hours tending to him, making sure he was warm, feeding him water, and whispering encouragements when his chest still shook with weakness. The Alpha King stirred again, stronger this time. His eyes, once clouded with pain, now held clarity, though a shadow of vulnerability lingered. For the first time in decades, he did not stand above the pack with unquestioned power. He had seen death, felt it brush against him, and had been returned to life by one the world had deemed unworthy. That realization unsettled him. Why did you save me?" he asked, his voice low but steady. His eyes studied Leora, searching for motives he could understand. Leora lifted her gaze to meet his. "Because you are alive," she said simply. "Because giving up is not an option, not for me." Not for anyone who cares about this pack. Her words struck something deep within him. He had spent his life commanding others, enforcing loyalty with fear and respect. But Leora did not fear him. She had never feared him. She had approached him with courage even when others faltered. And now she held his life in her hands, quite literally. For a moment, the Alpha King's pride bristled. He wanted to rise, to assert control, to remind the pack and himself that he was still the Alpha. But his body refused. Weakness lay in his muscles. Tremors ran through his limbs, and every attempt to stand brought pain. He glanced at Leora, realizing that for the first time, he would need her not as a servant, not as a follower, but as an equal in this fragile moment. "You have power," he said finally, his tone quiet but edged with awe. "I see it now, more than anyone else in this pack has ever had. What are you?" Leora shook her head, her hand still pressed against his chest. "I am nothing important, just an Omega, rejected, forgotten. But I can help you. That is enough." He laughed softly, a sound that surprised even him. Weakness mixed with amusement, creating something unfamiliar. "A rejected Omega, saving the Alpha King. The world is full of ironies." Days passed. The Alpha King's strength returned slowly, each step a challenge. Leora remained by his side, guiding him, caring for him, teaching him to move without collapsing. The bond between them deepened with every passing hour. She began to understand the man beneath the legend, the loneliness, the regret, and the hidden kindness he rarely showed. And he began to notice her courage, her cleverness, and the quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. One evening, as the silver moonlight spilled across the courtyard, the Alpha King walked with Leora beside him. His steps were cautious, yet each one reflected determination. "You've changed everything," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not just for me, but for the pack. They look at me differently now." "And at you," Leora's heart fluttered. "I don't care what they think," she said softly. "I only care that you live, that you are here." The Alpha King paused, turning to face her. His eyes softened, vulnerability mixing with a growing respect. "You care too much," he said. "And yet, that is exactly why I need you." Their moments together became more frequent, stolen in the shadows of the fortress, away from the watchful eyes of the pack. Leora helped him recover from his wounds, fed him, and listened to his thoughts. The burdens of leadership, the weight of centuries of decisions, and the ghosts of those he could not save. And in those quiet moments, a connection began to form, a bond that was neither spoken nor claimed but felt deeply. The Alpha King, once untouchable, now leaned on her guidance. Leora, once rejected, now stood as his anchor, the one who had returned him from the brink of death. Yet outside the fortress walls, shadows gathered. Rival packs and distant enemies sensed weakness. Whispers of a fallen Alpha traveled across the lands, and some began plotting to strike while he was vulnerable. Even within the pack, envy and doubt festered. Not all welcomed the return of the king, and not all accepted the role of Leora. One night, as the moon rose high, the Alpha King sat with Leora near the central hearth. His body had regained much of its strength, but his mind wrestled with uncertainty. "I have ruled for decades," he said, voice heavy with thought. "I thought I understood power, loyalty, fear, but I never understood what it meant to be saved, to depend on someone else, especially someone like you." Leora shook her head gently. "You are not weak because you were saved. You are human. And being human is what makes you strong, stronger than anyone who has never faced death." He looked at her, and for the first time he truly saw her. Not the rejected Omega, not the weakling, but a woman of courage, wisdom, and unexpected strength. "You have changed me," he whispered. "More than any battle, more than any victory, you mattered to me." Leora's cheeks warmed, and she looked down, trying to hide the fluttering of her heart. "You matter to me, too," she said softly. "But we have dangers still. You are not fully healed, and others, they are waiting for a chance." The Alpha King's eyes narrowed. For the first time, his focus was not just on surviving, but on protecting her, on preparing for the battles to come. "Then we face them together," he said firmly. "No one threatens this pack or you while I stand." Days turned into nights and training began. The Alpha King regained his strength, learning to move with power yet caution. Leora trained alongside him, not as a subordinate but as a partner. She taught him to sense danger, to anticipate attacks, and to trust her instincts. The connection between them grew, a silent rhythm that neither had known before. Mutual respect, unspoken understanding, and a threat of something deeper, something tender. Then one evening, an unexpected threat arrived. The fortress gates rattled and a figure entered. A rival Omega, long spurned and bitter, carrying dark intentions. She had heard of the Alpha's revival and came bearing a curse, a dark magic meant to bind the Alpha permanently to death. Her eyes glowed with malice, and the air around her seemed to twist with power. The Alpha King's body shivered involuntarily, the weakness from his near death still present. Leora stepped forward, placing herself between him and the intruder. "You will not touch him," she said, voice steady, though her heart raced. The rival Omega sneered, raising her hands as shadows began to creep along the Alpha King's skin. He gasped, struggling to stay upright as the curse started to take hold. The darkness wrapped around him like chains, sapping strength, threatening to undo everything Leora had fought to restore. "Leora," the Alpha King gasped, his voice strained. "Do something." "I cannot," but Leora did not hesitate. She pressed her hands to his chest, closing her eyes, and whispered the same ancient words she had used to awaken him. Power surged through her, a light against the creeping shadows. Her energy clashed with the rival's dark magic, and for a moment, the hall trembled, the walls shaking under the force of their struggle. The Alpha King's eyes met hers, full of trust and vulnerability. For the first time, he let go of pride and fear. He allowed himself to be guided, to rely on her completely. And together they pushed back the darkness, the rival's curse faltering under the combined force of their bond. Yet the battle was not over. The rival Omega retreated with a hiss, leaving behind a warning in the air, a shadow that promised the darkness was not done. The Alpha King leaned on Leora, his chest heaving, eyes wide with awe and gratitude. You saved me again," he whispered, his voice low, trembling with emotion. "I owe you everything. My life, my strength, my heart." Leora's hand remained on his chest, steadying him. "We face it together," she said firmly. "Always together." The bond between them was no longer fragile or tentative. It was forged in survival, trust, and an unspoken connection that neither the pack nor their enemies could break. The moonlight spilled across the fortress once more, casting long shadows across the hall. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of trials yet to come. But for now, in this moment, the Alpha King and Leora stood together, equal, bound by trust, and ready to face whatever darkness awaited them. Cliffhanger. As they stood side by side, a distant howl echoed through the night, low and ominous. Both their eyes narrowed, knowing that the shadowy forces that threatened the Alpha King were only the beginning. And this time, the danger would test not just their strength but the bond that had begun to grow between them. The night had grown deep, the moon casting silver light over the fortress. Shadows stretched across the walls, moving like living creatures, whispering of dangers yet unseen. The Alpha King and Leora stood side by side in the central hall, the air thick with anticipation and the faint scent of smoke from the hearth. The rival Omega's curse lingered like a dark fog, threatening to strike again at any moment. The Alpha King flexed his hands, testing his strength, but the shadowy chains of the curse still tugged at him. "It is not gone," he said, his voice tight with tension. "It lingers, like a weight I cannot lift alone." Leora nodded, her eyes steady. "Then we do this together," she said. "I know the rights. I know the power that can break it, but it will not be easy. We both must give everything, every ounce of strength, every heartbeat, every trust we have in each other." He studied her, seeing not just courage, but a fire that mirrored his own. For centuries he had ruled through fear and strength. Now he realized that true power came from trust, from connection, from letting someone else share in his life and burdens. And for the first time he did not hesitate. "Then let us begin," he said, voice calm but resolute. They moved to the center of the hall. Leora knelt, hands outstretched, and began chanting the ancient words of her lineage. The Alpha King knelt across from her, placing his hands over hers. The warmth of her energy surged into him, battling the shadows that had crept along his skin. The dark curse hissed and recoiled, as if recognizing that it had underestimated their bond. The hall seemed to pulse with the power of their unity. The torches flickered, casting moving shadows on the stone walls. The air shimmered with a strange energy, and even the walls themselves seemed to lean in closer, as if witnessing the birth of something extraordinary. Pain shot through the Alpha King's body as the curse fought to cling to him. His knees shook, his teeth gritted, but he did not falter. He felt Leora's energy, steady and unwavering, grounding him. He focused on her hands, her eyes, the rhythm of her voice. The darkness tried to twist his mind with fear and doubt, but he clung to her, to the trust they had forged. "Keep your heart open," Leora urged, her voice strong and commanding, yet gentle. "Do not resist me. Let me guide the light into you. Let us destroy this darkness together." The Alpha King did as she asked. He let go of pride, let go of fear, and allowed himself to be a part of something greater than himself. The shadows around him shrieked, bending, twisting, and writhing as the combined force of Leora's power and his own life energy pushed against the curse. For a moment, it seemed impossible. The darkness pulsed stronger than ever, wrapping around him like chains of ice. The Alpha King gritted his teeth, summoning every ounce of will he had left. Leora's hands pressed harder, her eyes locking onto his, conveying an unspoken promise. "We will not fail. Not now, not ever." And then, as if the world itself exhaled, the curse shattered. The shadows exploded into tiny motes of darkness, scattering into the air like smoke in the wind. The Alpha King collapsed, breathless but alive, his chest rising and falling with strength returning. Leora held him close, supporting him, feeling his pulse steady beneath her hands. For a moment, neither spoke. Silence filled the hall, heavy and complete, yet not oppressive. It was a silence of victory, of relief, and of something far deeper. A connection that had been forged in fire and shadow. The Alpha King lifted his head, his eyes meeting Leora's. He saw not just a savior, but an equal, a partner, and something more. Gratitude, admiration, and longing swirled in his gaze. You have given me life twice," he whispered, "and I cannot repay you. Not with gold, not with power, not with anything the world offers." Leora shook her head, smiling softly. "You don't need to repay me," she said. "We are bound now, not by duty or rank or fear, but by trust, by what we have faced together. That is enough." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Trust and something more," he murmured. His voice was soft yet carried weight. "I feel it, between us, and I cannot ignore it." Leora's heart fluttered, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had never imagined that the Alpha King, strong, proud, and legendary, would see her not as a rejected Omega, but as a woman who could stand beside him, who could shape his fate and share his life. The Alpha King slowly rose, still weak but strong enough to stand with her. They faced the hall together, the pack waiting silently, watching the two of them as they emerged from the ritual. The atmosphere was electric with awe and respect. For the first time, the pack did not see a ruler and a subject. They saw two equals bound by survival, trust, and an unspoken love. Outside the fortress, the wind had calmed. The moonlight painted silver trails across the snow-covered courtyard. The Alpha King turned to Leora, his eyes reflecting both the strength he had regained and the vulnerability he had learned to accept. "You have changed me," he said quietly, "not just as a king, but as a man. I no longer fear weakness, because I have learned that strength is in connection, in trust, in letting someone share your life." Leora reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "And you have shown me courage, bravery, and that even someone rejected, forgotten, can make a difference." They stood there side by side, the bond between them no longer fragile or tentative. It had been forged in shadow, danger, and life-threatening trials. And it would not break easily. But even as the fortress breathed in peace, the world outside was restless. The rival Omega had retreated, but the darkness she had unleashed lingered in whispers in the trees in the distant forests. Both the Alpha King and Leora knew that more challenges would come, more enemies would seek to test their bond, and more shadows would rise to challenge their courage. Yet neither hesitated. They had faced death, they had faced magic and curse, and they had emerged stronger together. The Alpha King had learned to trust, to rely on someone beside him. Leora had learned the power of courage, of belief, and of connection. Together, they were no longer just Alpha and Omega. They were partners, bound in heart and purpose. The night deepened. Stars sparkled in the sky like distant eyes watching the fortress, watching the two who had defied fate. The wind whispered promises of more trials, but also of hope and renewal. The Alpha King and Leora stood together, ready to face whatever the world would send next. Their hearts beating in rhythm, their bond unbreakable. Finally, the Alpha King spoke, his voice steady, filled with quiet determination. Whatever comes, we face it together. You and I, always. Leora nodded, her eyes shining with emotion. Always, she echoed. The fortress, once a place of fear and hierarchy, now held a new story. A story of life returned, of trust earned, of courage proven, and of hearts bound in ways stronger than any magic, stronger than any curse, stronger than any shadow. The Alpha King turned toward the distant forest, sensing movement in the dark. He did not flinch. Leora stood beside him, ready to face it with him. Together they would meet the coming storms. Together they would rule, not just by strength, but by bond and trust, by courage and love. And as the first light of dawn brushed the peaks of the mountains, the Alpha King and Leora stood together, unyielding, victorious, and forever changed. Cliffhanger ending note: the shadows may rise again, and enemies may test them once more, but in this bond, forged in shadow and life, the Alpha King and Leora had found something eternal: trust, courage, and a love born of survival and shared destiny. And no darkness could ever erase that.